am I crazy? Is there something wrong with me?
Are you seeing this? Is anybody else seeing what I'm seeing?
This doesn't make any sense. None of it makes any sense. Has the world gone mad? Gone mad.
I found that ideas were weapons and were even more effective than bullets.
As one who knows that another war could utterly destroy this civilization, I wish I could say tonight that a lasting peace is in sight.
The United States, as the world knows, will never start a war.
The contest in Vietnam is part of a wider pattern of aggressive purposes.
We force young black men and young white men to fight and kill in brutal solidarity. Yet when they come back home, they can't hardly live on the same block.
The white liberal differs from the white conservative only in one way. The white liberal is able to use the Negro as a pawn or a weapon in this political football game.
If you want to understand the way some system works, you look at its institutional structure.
Welcome to Ambiology. In episode 1, producers Blake Minnerly and Steve Ordower introduce a new way of thinking about American politics, one that steps outside the familiar left-right divide. They share their personal journeys, question the stories we've been told, and explore how history, incentives, and media shape the way we see each other. Rather than arguing for compromise or centrism, this conversation invites curiosity and humility as they begin to build a framework for understanding our political system beyond tribal labels. If you've ever felt politically homeless or wondered why nothing seems to make sense anymore, you're in the right place.
Welcome, everybody, to Ambiology Episode 1. I'm Blake Minnerly, and with me is my intrepid co-host and partner in crime and producer of the show, Steve Ordower. Hey, Steve.
Hello.
How are you?
Hello. Nice to see you, Blake.
Yeah, good to see you, too. I'm excited about this conversation. This has been a project which, to put it mildly, has been a long time in the making, right?
Yes, absolutely.
I don't know when we started talking about this, but it was probably maybe 7 months ago, 8 months ago.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, and when I say this, of course, the whole point of this episode is that we're going to try and describe this idea that we have developed, this sort of burgeoning philosophy, this journey that we are on to sort of produce a deeper understanding of our political system and of ourselves, how we interact with each other, how we communicate with each other as people, as a culture, and how the various forces historically have led us to where we are today and the kind of political situation that we see ourselves in. And it's the idea that we are trying to develop ambiology, which is in the short term an attempt to escape the left-right spectrum entirely as a construct, not an attempt to seek compromise or to be centrist, but to simply release the construct entirely as unnecessary and, in fact, mythological. Right. But it's very difficult to describe to people, and it's going to take us probably more than one episode. And a part of that is because it's a complex idea and novel to the two of us, but also because both of us really are engaged in this journey of developing this as we go. So everybody is really going to be watching us develop this idea in real time. We have kind of like a rough starting point, right? We have some understandings of what it is that we're trying to do. We've looked at both some current events and a lot of historical events in order to try and develop this idea. But everybody's really gonna be seeing us trying to figure out in real time what the hell it is that we actually mean really by ambiology, right?
Yeah, we're processing it.
Yeah, and processing the experience that we have each personally gone through,
And going through
in trying to understand where do we belong, if there is in fact such a thing as where we belong politically, vis-a-vis the country, our peers, our family, and now our wonderful listeners, if there in fact are any. We'll see, right? So, we wanted to sort of start off the conversation, I guess, by talking about just kind of who we are a little bit and where we're coming from and why this idea seems so necessary to us, and where we're trying to get to, what we're hoping to achieve through all of this, and maybe give people kind of a window into what they can expect in future episodes as well.
Great.
So, I guess starting with the personal journey, I think there's kind of a due diligence that is required, that we talk about where we're coming from politically, even though both of us, I would say, I don't want to speak for you, but both of us would probably say that we've really moved away from where we were politically, not to the other side of the spectrum, but off the spectrum.
Yeah, which is an important distinction. Very important.
Very important, because I guess I would say, really, the ideals that both of us have, as I understand them, we've known each other a long time. We should start with that. We've been friends for 30 years. And so we have a very good sense of who each other is, if that's the proper verb there. Values have been pretty stable, right? Really, what we care about.
Yes, it's funny how,
right?
I mean, I've had these conversations with people, and it's like, the ideals that I had growing up seem to have been confirmed over time, although now we're in a perplexing situation where it's these political affiliations in the tribe that we were in order for us to maintain a strong relationship with our ideals. There was a crossroads that we came to, and we had to make a move. And now we reconnected within the last year, and we noticed we were experiencing some similar things in a similar way.
Yeah, I think it would be fair to say that a realization that we've had is that a lot of the people around us have seemed relatively comfortable with major adjustments to not necessarily their values, but the way that those values are reflected in their positions on policies and historical events. And there's a kind of a messaging that is coming from the dominant political factions that we have in the country. And there's a lot of people who seem quite comfortable shifting according to those messages shifting. And we've had a lot more difficulty than other people, perhaps, in getting on board with those changes. And there was a growing sense of sort of cognitive dissonance between what we have believed and what we have believed was the sort of were the central tenets of the political tribe that we belong to. And what we were seeing that political tribe advocate. They seemed very much in conflict. That seemed not to bother a lot of people. And I want to be clear, that's not a judgment. It's not even a little bit that I think that either one of us is somehow better. I think that for whatever, there's a sort of almost random personality traits and one that we both share, that we have more difficulty making those kind of epistemological shifts without being like, what, and getting that kind of like Scooby-Doo sort of face. Like, wait,
totally. But it's not, Yeah, it's not like we were totally not susceptible to it. I mean, we're all susceptible to this to some degree. And so
absolutely,
what keeps coming up in our conversations over time is this sense of humility that is so critical to allow us to transcend these perspectives that have limited our understanding of things. And once we have been able to do this in a conscious way, I know that and I would probably speak for both of us, our understanding of issues that are important to us has increased.
For sure. And because the dissonance that we felt has really forced us to take a lot of deep dives into a lot of different issues, a lot of different historical things, a lot of different aspects of how our system really functions if you start to unpack the sort of surface level stories about what's going on and try and look at a more sort of systemic institutional level, what's actually happening. They seem different. And I think the reasons that we're able to be in this position are really mostly accidental. It has nothing to do with like any superior intellect or anything else that we have. It's a happenstance of the course of our lives and a happenstance of where the world is at right now. That desire to go to belong, that desire to be part of the tribe, to be on the same page with the people who are important to you, with your community, your peers, is a super like understandable and maybe even essential human function. Like it's completely clear why it happens. There's even really good things about that. There's reasons that we don't just want to be oppositional to everyone around us all the time, right? That's really irritating and not productive, right? Personally, I certainly don't want to just be a contrarian. I don't want to simply be the person who is, sort of standing up and being, I'm not like the rest of you. This has been a very reluctant voyage for the two of us, I'd say, and sometimes a very painful one, right? Because there's been really sometimes a lot of loneliness. And until that we started to sort of understand the position, a lot of like, am I crazy? Is there something wrong with me? And our conversations and conversations that we've had with other people have really brought us to a point where it's like, okay, no, we're perceiving something that is worth pursuing here.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting how it's been playing out. And and when we reconnected, it was specifically between you and me, I could speak for myself. That would hello.
My dog is going to be barking during this podcast, by the way.
That's not fantastic. What's your dog's name?
Percy. Yeah.
Percy. Okay. Well, hello, Percy. Thanks for chiming in. I appreciate that. But yeah, for when you and I connected specifically, it was very, very helpful for me to just not feel so alone in terms of, are you seeing this? Is anybody else seeing what I'm seeing? That was very, very helpful for me to stay grounded in who I am and what I'm perceiving. That I wasn't just making this up in my head.
Yeah. And also there was a sense to me that there was an increasing sense of like, has the world gone mad? Right? This doesn't make any sense. None of it makes any sense. And when we began to let go of that surface level, what we claim as a hypothesis is really a mythology about our political system, everything made a lot more sense. It didn't seem so crazy anymore. It seemed like a system behaving the way you would expect it to behave according to the incentive structure and the institutional structure that is guiding that system. Right.
Yes. And the incentive structures are so critical to understanding this.
Absolutely. And much more important than understanding the supposed moral authority of any of the individuals who are supposedly representative of these systems of thought. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So
exactly.
I guess kind of getting back to like where we came from, I think due diligence kind of demands that we talk about where we were politically initially. You know, both of us, I think, sort of grew up very much on the left, right?
Mm-hmm.
Correct. We both grew up on the south side of Chicago, in a very strongly democratic community that was very tied to the civil rights movement, that was very tied, at least to some extent, to the anti-war movement. Both of us had parents that in different ways really championed those issues. Your father and my father in particular, I know were very influential on each of us respectively in that regard.
For sure.
So we had these kind of classic 60s and 70s democratic left ideology, at least so we thought of it at the time.
Yeah, right? I just want to just add a little bit to that from my own experience. I mean, my father was even kind of beyond that to some degree. I mean, he was kind of a freedom fighter, at least in my interview. I'm working on a documentary about him and the show he produced, this gospel music television show, Jubilee Showcase. So when I interviewed Reverend Jesse Jackson about him, that's what he said. He's like, oh, Sid was a freedom fighter, which, you know, it's like these ideals were firmly implanted in me, not forcefully at all. It was through lots of vibrant debate, which was very stimulating on a lot of levels. Intellectually, it was wonderful to have conversations with my father, and I miss him dearly, and I wish that I could have these conversations with him now to make sense of what's going on, because he was pointing out the hypocrisy of the United States, and I would be very interested to hear what both of our fathers would be saying about what we're doing right now. I think they would probably be heavily in favor of it, to be honest with you, and like what's going on here with this political divide. And then when you mentioned this Conversations with Coleman interview with Hiram and Verlin Lewis about the book that they wrote, I was just like, this is it. I mean, this is what I've been processing, and you just kind of helped bring it home for me. So yeah, I definitely have always been thinking about these type of things from a from a ideal standpoint. But in terms of the political party affiliation, it just seemed like that was the Democratic Party was the one that lined up with the most. But, you know, when I met, and I know this is a bit of an aside, if I may, but when I met my wife, Christina, we couldn't be, I mean, our backgrounds are very different. I grew up in Hyde Park, as you mentioned, in the south side of Chicago, and a very integrated, mixed environment, rather, and from a variety, and there were a variety of opinions for sure, and perspectives and cultures. And she was from a pretty homogeneous community, or what have you, and fairly conservative, for lack of a better phrase. I know we're trying to get away from those labels, but
identified as conservative.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And so what was interesting when we started getting a little bit more into our relationship and we started to talk about politics a little bit more, I say, look, the key to voting, in my mind, if I may, is just find, like, you have your values and find political representatives that are running for office that are in line with your values and work backwards. And I still I still hold that to be true. However, with what you're saying is, yeah, the memo came out and things are shifting and we're just supposed to get in line and we're both like, no, we're not doing that, because we actually do have a pretty strong sense of our ideals. And so, like you were saying, this is, to be clear, this show is not about getting away from what you think is right or wrong, or your perspectives on things and your ideals. It's actually an avenue to keep them with you and to embrace them even that much more closely, and be clear about what actually is influencing you to get away from those ideals that are really important to you.
Absolutely. An analogy that I sometimes think of is a little bit like joining a fraternity, which was always something, not to knock anybody who's in a fraternity. I'm sure it's like there's lots of good things about fraternities, and they,
for sure,
you know, they get a bad rap, and maybe that's deserved, maybe it's not. That's not really my point. But
right.
You know, sort of the idea is you could go to a college and just be like, I like these kinds of people, and I like having these kinds of conversations and sharing these ideas. And so, oh, here's somebody, and here's somebody, and there's somebody. Or you could sort of outsource that and say, well, there's these different fraternities, and they have kind of like different personalities. And if it's like, you know, Phi Alpha, Alpha, I don't know what I don't know any fraternities. Sigma Pi, Omicron, I don't know, right? I was never in a frat. So, but the idea is...
I'm sorry, go ahead. That was pretty funny. Alfalfa, that's what got me.
Hey, yeah, I'm a little Rascals fan. So the idea is that these different frats have like different personalities, right? People really strongly believe this. So this frat is more these kinds of people, and that frat is more those kinds of people. So the assumption is, if I join this frat, then I'm going to be hanging out with the kind of people that I like, right? So you're letting this sort of institutional middleman come in and be like, hey, we're going to handle your political values for you. If you have these kinds of values, hey, you want to be over here in this political frat. That's where those kinds of people are. And the fact is, you just don't have to join a frat. You can just like the people that you like. You can just have the political values that you have without needing to associate them, without needing to place them somewhere on a spectrum that we would claim is actually mythological, right? That's going to be the whole basis of the show, is that this spectrum is, and I want to make this point right here, because when we say mythological, I can hear some people reacting like, what do you mean mythological? Like, it doesn't matter if Trump wins or Biden wins. It's not at all what we're saying, right?
Right.
Myths can have profound impacts on what actually occurs in real life. Look at racism, right? As a biological entity, race is a myth, right? It doesn't really have a biological essence, right? And that's a whole other discussion. But because we believe, because it's a big one, but because we believe in that myth, it's real. Right. It affects our everyday life profoundly, right?
Exactly.
So saying that something is a myth is not to say that it's not real. It's a real myth, right? In the same way, any myth that you believe, like if you believe that, you know, all Leos are brave and all Scorpios are intense, then that might be nonsense if you don't believe in astrology, but it's still going to affect how you interact with other humans if you believe in it. So it becomes real, right? That's what we mean by the left-right spectrum is a myth. It's a story that we tell ourselves that then has very profound effects on how we see reality, how we perceive each other, how we interact with each other.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
And we're also not saying that the positions that get represented in any given current moment by the left or the right are mythological, right?
Right.
So
totally.
Yeah, a given party at any given moment might be associated with something that you genuinely think is terrible. And in no way are we trying to dissuade anybody from that belief.
Because, you know, a lot of people, for sure. And I just wanted to say a lot of times people will say things like, well, you know, they're all corrupt and there's really no difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. And I just think it's kind of lazy, to be honest.
It's lazy.
To respect it, because there's a huge difference between them. There's
huge.
A vast difference between them, but that's not what we acknowledge that. We acknowledge that, and we are still saying that it would be a good idea, perhaps, to break free from this so that we can have a deeper understanding of what's going on. Because oftentimes what we'll talk about in a variety of different ways over the lifespan of this project, of this podcast show, Ambiology, which is, oftentimes from the scholarship of the Lewis brothers with their book, they noted that nowadays you can be part of a tribe agreeing with one or two policy positions, and then generally people are in for the rest, which is not really conducive to understanding these policy initiatives on a deeper level. And so what I think is the best way to go about understanding this this landscape is to just understand issue by issue, as opposed to this bucket of issues. And then you say, okay, my stance on abortion is this and this other thing and one other thing, and then all of a sudden you're for all the stuff in this bucket. It seems rather absurd and limiting.
Yeah, and I think that reproductive rights is a great example, right? Because someone might, for example, feel very strongly about reproductive rights, myself included. I'm very strongly in favor of reproductive rights as a tenet of basic bodily autonomy for all humans.
Sure.
But if you do, then you're going to look at the two parties. And of course, you're going to align yourself in the current moment more with the Democratic Party than with the Republican Party, if you believe that. Okay. And in no way would we suggest that that's insane or wrong or anything else. It's completely understandable. Exactly. But then you're associating with a group of people who are part of a larger institution that has kind of a shopping cart full of positions which don't necessarily have any coherent link to each other, and just to get along with the other people that share your belief in reproductive rights, everyone has to take on these other ideas also. So that's a part of it. It doesn't make any sense. But another thing that I think we want to get to is it's not simply a matter of the fact that we think that this sort of like frat system, these two shopping carts of issues that we can pick that are actually constantly shifting, right? What's totally,
way more than you realize actually when we start examining it. Yeah.
Way more. Yeah. And it actually goes back to our earlier point when we were saying like, well, the left used to be like this. It's not like we're hearkening back to the good old days. Well, one of the realizations that we've had is that shift is continuous. It's constantly changing, right? What constitutes the left and what constitutes the right is really very unstable over a historic time scale, right?
Yes.
So,
but that's why the scholarship, that scholarship by the Lewis brothers is so important. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
So important. And we'll spend some more time talking about them, and specifically at the end of the show too. We've referenced them a lot because they've been extremely, they've informed probably more than any one academic source. They've informed a lot of our thinking about this position. So we'll get definitely more into them, but it's not just that the left-right spectrum is unrealistic or unnecessary. It's that we have come to the very strong opinion that it is dysfunctional, destructive, reduces the compassion that we have for each other, increases fear, anxiety, blind hatred of other people that we don't even know, that in fact we might have a very warm regard for and large amounts of common ground with, even if we disagree in this place, another place. And that spectrum serves a social function of power. right? It is useful
Preach.
to
Yes.
power, right?
Yes.
And so that is the other idea there's these
divided.
differences.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And there's these differences that are legitimate, reproductive rights over here and not over here.
But
then there's all this other stuff kind of above those wedge issues that they share entirely in common.
Yeah, and I mean, that's totally, I mean, there's so many really, really important issues like the environment, campaign finance reform, our interaction with other countries on a global scale, how are we managing the economy, taxes, fiscal responsibility or lack thereof, etc. It goes on and on and on. And, I'm sure you and I both have seen many examples of people that, are really, I used to hear about in the political landscape, the one issue voter. That just kind of boggles my mind to me. Like one issue is more important than any other. Well, maybe that's fine. And I don't want to stand in judgment of anybody, but there's so many issues that are important, particularly, you could say that about any time in history. I was going to say particularly right now, with the environment and the variety of opinions and perspectives about that. And why should that have anything to do with your stance on reproductive rights?
The assumption that seems kind of crazy is that if you believe in reproductive rights and bodily autonomy, that therefore, let's say you are also very in favor of continued funding for arming Ukraine, or you are in favor of higher taxes on the 1%, or fiscal policy or foreign policy or anything else. That's the part that's really mythological, that there is one sort of liberal or conservative principle that is cleaving every political issue in half according to that singular principle and sorting them into two bins according to that one sort of master concept, that is sort of one defining political issue that rules them all, right?
Yeah,
that's a myth, and it's quite obvious that there's more than one issue in politics, right? It should be obvious.
Yeah, well, that's what I think with the interview that will be rolling out next episode with Verlin Lewis, which was incredible. Can't wait to share this with the audience. But, he was basically saying there's more than one issue in politics. And I'm like, what? Of course there is. But then he broke it down in terms of what we're talking about right now. Of course there is. Why should you just be in line with one issue and then get in line with the rest because you're part of a tribe and it's part of your identity? I used to think about this as a kid, and it just, those thoughts have just been confirmed over time, which is one's identity is very, very powerful, and how that is shaped and how one relates to themselves in that way. If you identify in a certain way and align yourself with a political tribe, and then you throw in a little religion to amplify that relationship in terms of how you move through the world, it's a very powerful mix. And that's why, you mix, like the Republican Party years ago made a relationship with evangelicals, and next thing you know, they wanted to increase their power base, and they brought in this policy about abortion rights, or rather they were against abortion, and they increased their power base dramatically. But it's not like the Republican Party really cared about that before this moment in time where they made an alliance with the evangelicals. So if you just start looking at it from an unattached lens, and you put emotion to the side, things start to get clear pretty quickly. It's actually quite refreshing and liberating and actually empowering. But the initial stages, to be quite frank, can be a little daunting.
Absolutely. It's a very unsettling thing to abandon a worldview, a framework. Like, we are so used to viewing all political interactions as a struggle between an epic battle between two sides, one of which is good and one of which is bad, right? We're so conditioned to that.
Right.
When you first start to like put that down, it's like taking off a pair of glasses that you've been wearing for years. Everything's distorted and fuzzy, and you're like, where am I? And you're falling over and bumping into things. People are getting mad at you, you know? It's, you know, and it's very daunting. And the one other thing that I would add is that the other really powerful, perhaps the most powerful aspect of this in terms of this show and where we really want to go in future episodes is that if in fact the nature of our institutional structure, the nature of our political struggles is not actually a battle between the left and the right. That's kind of a storytelling veneer that we put over the top of things. That means that there is some other actual reality underneath that, or maybe it's just layers of an onion and you're just constantly going down. But at any rate, by putting away that distorting lens, you can look more nakedly at the reality of our structure, at the nature of our history, at the nature of what we call modern U.S. democracy, at what the functions of our institutions are, right? As another realization that I think that both of us have come to is that at a certain high level, above the level of party, there's a lot of very, very powerful people who simply, they're not engaging in that mythology. They're like left, right, whatever you need, right? Pro-abortion, anti-abortion, I don't know. What do the focus groups say, right? How are we going to make more profit as a corporation? What's more effective as a public relations tool? What narrative is going to be more useful to us in this particular shifting political moment? So our hope is that by putting this structure away and just leaving it alone, we can deepen our understanding of how our institutions actually function. So that's what I'm hoping this show can become.
Yes. I mean, I remember when, I interviewed you not too long ago on a podcast I host, Rhythm of Life, and you said that, and in this particular paradigm inhibits real and thoughtful institutional analysis, and that just hit me like a ton of bricks. It couldn't be more true in my mind, and it really does, and that's why we're so, I think, inspired to bring this show to the public so that it can help people with this process of letting those rose-colored glasses go and taking them off, so to speak, because I don't think we're alone. I don't think we're alone at all. I think a lot of people are experiencing something like this, but they can't quite maybe articulate it or can't put their finger on it, but they feel something's going on and something's really strange. And just the handful of folks in my circle that I shared my interview with you with, they were very grateful and thankful that we're doing something like this. It really hit them in a very profound way. So I think actually there's a much larger audience than we might think. I mean, it does feel at first, you're all alone, but part of this is really cathartic for us as we process this, because we're going through it right now as we're developing this show. We're going through the transformation, so you guys can, our audience can experience this with us.
Absolutely. And I think this would be the time to that sort of our own epistemic humility would demand that we're never going to be saying this is the way things are. Maybe we're going to be saying this is the way things aren't. Like this mythology, this story does not really seem to add up with reality. But then it's up to each of us, once we put that distorting lens, it's up to each of us to decide for ourselves what's actually going on. And my idea or your idea is really not any more valuable than anybody. We're not claiming any expertise, right? We're not political scientists.
Totally.
We're two people on the only things I'm expert at are Newtonian physics and music, right? So
nice.
These
are pretty good things.
Well, and even that, I'm gonna like put expert with a little asterisk on it. I'm not a big believer in expertise anyway, to be honest. But
sure.
We have more questions than answers. We are trying to unpack the distorting lenses, and then the actual reality. That's for everybody to have at and decide for themselves. Hopefully, what they think is really going on. We'll present some different pieces of history, some different texts from the past, some different moments that we think are illustrative of the process that we're talking about.
Totally.
But it's really both of us trying to figure this out in real time, just what you said.
Yes, absolutely.
And this might be a great time to move on a little bit to some of the polling data that we looked at about, like, are we alone? Where is the American public in terms of these ideas of left and right, and maybe that polling data also starts to reveal a little bit of the mythology that we've been talking about.
Can I just add one quick thing before we move on? It's just quick, which is what's really amazing about this process is I can hear, and I believe that you're experiencing this as well, as I can hear politicians from the other side in a much more substantive way. I can actually hear what they're saying and consider it for myself rather than immediately looking at them and already subconsciously thinking they're full of crap. They're from the bad side. They're the enemy.
They're from the other frat.
Yeah, exactly. And they're not good or what have you. So I can listen to somebody like Rand Paul and just listen to the words coming out of his mouth and the ideas coming out of his mouth and make a much more thoughtful consideration of what he's actually saying as opposed to what I think he's saying. And really, or maybe I'm reading somebody's interpretation of what they're saying. I think it's very, very important to listen to people directly. And I think, one of the aims of this show is to have people do more of that than look through these lenses that we've spoken about before. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, for sure. In order to critique an idea effectively, even if someone you disagree with strongly, you have to first be willing to present the best version of it, right? What is this person actually saying, right?
Exactly.
And if you're just like, this is an expression of somebody from the bad frat, so therefore I'm not going to even engage with the idea itself, you're not even critiquing the idea. You're not even effectively disagreeing with the idea, right? So let's take a look at that data. I think this is kind of fascinating. So we'll bring this up in post and put these issues up on the screen. But we're going to be looking at some polling data from, I believe it was 2016. This is Pew Research Group, and they did a survey of, I want to say it was something like 1,200 self-identified likely Democrat and Republican voters. And the polling data was all about their perception of each other, and the degree of polarization that is being revealed by people's political positions over time. Right. So looking at the first graphic here, beyond dislike, viewing the other party as a threat to the nation's well-being, we have three graphics here from 10-year intervals, 1994, 2004, 2014. This is already kind of out of date. Obviously, we're 10 years down the road, and I would guess that if we looked at the 2024 data, these trends would be continuing, maybe even exponentially. I don't really know.
Right.
But we can already see that, more than a quarter of Republicans and Democrats are now basically viewing each other as existential threats, right? Whereas it was a much smaller percentage in 1994, right? But we all know that. This is no surprise to anybody, right?
Of course.
And, then start to kind of like unpack why, and they sort of look at some other data. Here's another one. Republicans are shifting to the right. Democrats are shifting to the left. And here's where we start to really see this mythology in action in my mind. So there's one point, which is just that we can see that according to this poll, a larger and larger percentage of Democrats are becoming, quote, more democratic, right? More liberal. And Republicans are becoming more conservative. And I think it's just worth pointing out here that conservative and liberal are already just being sort of defined axiomatically, right? Just without proof.
Right. As an assumption. Can't question
as being linked with the parties, right? Being more democratic is being more liberal. Being more conservative is being more Republican is being more conservative. Right. And the same thing here. Democrats are more ideologically divided in the past, so that Democrats are more consistently liberal now, and Republicans are more consistently conservative. Right. Now, the assumption here that is being given without discussion is that there is such a thing as a measurable conservative belief system that you can pin down and say, here it is. This is what conservatives believe. Here is what liberals believe. This is a stable philosophical political entity that we can measure, and we're just observing reality, right?
Exactly.
But the devil is in the details. What does this mean to say that people are consistently conservative? Right? What is being consistently conservative? Well, you can see on this issue that they say this is according to a distribution of Democrats and Republicans on a 10-item scale of political values. Right? Okay, so that's their way of measuring it, right? They come up with 10 ideas that are bifurcated, that are split into a conservative view and a liberal view. And you have to go to the appendix and dig a little bit to find this scale and what they actually look at, which I did. And here it is. Okay. So this is where it really gets interesting to me. Like, let's take a look at the first one, right? The conservative position is government is always wasteful and inefficient, right? And the liberal position, government often does a better job than people give it credit for. And I can almost see a lot of people nodding their heads like, well, yeah, that seems right. My claim is that this is really no different than any other set of preconceptions and stereotypes about any groups of people. Men like machines, women like people. Leos are brave. Pisces are fickle. I don't know. I don't even know. I don't really follow astrology very much, but you get the idea. These are sort of unsubstantiated claims that could be true or false, depending on whether you want them to be true or false. So,
exactly.
A conservative position: government is always wasteful and inefficient. Well, right now, I would say a lot of conservatives probably think that ICE is not wasteful and is very efficient. Right? So they're in favor of that section of the government, right? And maybe some others, but there's obviously portions of the government that the current Republican Party is in favor of and therefore thinks is good. Right. And the same with the liberal position. Right. So government does a better job than people give it credit for. Well, they're not going to say that ICE does a better job than people give it credit for. Right. There's portions of the government that liberals are going to think are terrible, so-called liberals. Right. The identity of liberal.
Sure.
So this really just boils down to which part of the government you happen to be in favor of at a given point in time.
Exactly.
Right? As a generic statement, it doesn't make any sense. Same with regulation of the next one, regulation of business, right? The conservative position is government regulation of business usually does more harm than good. The liberal position, government regulation of business is necessary to protect the public interest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it really depends on what's being regulated. Right. You could say that right now we are regulating immigration to a much higher degree. And so it's the same thing, right? It's like, what business sector are you talking about that needs to be regulated?
Yes,
right?
Exactly. And I think a lot of conservative-minded people, again, for lack of a better phrase, think that we should have clean drinking water. Well, you know what? That takes regulation. So, I mean, it's all about how do you qualify this? These are just ridiculous generalizations on their face. You know, you're looking at this, you're like, oh, this is how they're coming up with this statistical analysis. Oh, we're moving farther away from each other. Conservatives are becoming more conservative and liberal more liberal. It's like, well, how are you defining that? And how did you get to that conclusion? Well, now we're seeing, and the more we're looking at it, the more ridiculous it is. So anyway.
Absolutely. Or this one. This is one of my favorites. The best way to ensure peace is through military strength. That's the conservative position. Good diplomacy is the best way to ensure peace. That's the liberal position. Well, not as regards NATO and Ukraine right now. Right? Right now, it would be more of a liberal position that we need to be interventionist, that we need to arm Ukraine, that we need to aid them in their war against Russia. And of course, we are not weighing in on these issues. We are talking about how we talk about these issues. There's valid reasons for people to believe what they believe about these things. We're not trying to say that anybody should or shouldn't believe these things. We're simply saying that the attempt to categorize them as left or right doesn't make any sense.
Exactly.
And especially on a historical scale. Look at this last one. Homosexuality should be discouraged by society, as opposed to the liberal position homosexuality should be accepted by society. Right?
Okay. All right.
Well, a majority of Republicans voted for gay marriage, right? Or at least a large number of Republicans. I don't actually know that it's a majority, so I need to be cautious about that. But there was relatively broad support amongst Republicans for gay marriage. On the other hand, historically, if we look back, let's take the historic icon of modern liberalism, FDR. Right? FDR started his role as a prosecutor by prosecuting and jailing homosexuals for the crime of being gay. Right? Now, it's not that the Republicans were pro-homosexuality at the time, but it's sort of silly to say that the liberal position is that homosexuality should be accepted by society. In this moment, that's true, but in relatively recent history, it was not. Right? In a time period that's still remembered by a lot of living people, right? That was not the case at all.
Yeah, totally.
And it may not be the case 20, 30 years from now. It's shifting all the time. Right? So this reminds me more than anything else of like these kinds of categorization schemes of like, what kind of Beatle are you? Are you John or Paul or Ringo or George, or, you know, are you a summer, spring, winter, or fall personality? Like, we love making up these categorization schemes that really don't have any basis in reality and trying to figure out where we fit in them. And there's nothing wrong with that, but we have to realize that we're the ones making it all up.
Oh, totally. And sometimes, you know, in certain regards, it gives people comfort, I guess. But, you know, we're viewing it, I guess, from, you know, our point of view is that oftentimes it gets in the way of really understanding what's around us and also interacting with each other. And that's so critical. And, you know, we keep so many people would probably agree, and out of concern that our country is becoming increasingly polarized. And, you know, I would venture to guess that that has become exacerbated through social media. It's kind of ridiculous and very, very disturbing on many levels. And so this is an attempt to allow us to perceive people from different walks of life and different factions and different tribes more as people, and listen to them and try to understand as opposed to try to win an argument. And so much of our public discourse seems to be about the warring factions and trying to win an argument. You look on social media and you see headlines such as so-and-so destroyed so-and-so in the Senate hearing, or they made so-and-so look foolish. I'm so not interested. I'm so tired of that. Was there something that allowed us to understand the issue in a better way?
Is there an idea to unpack there? Is there some data? Is there some evidence? Is there some deeper understanding of the world that we're achieving? Obviously, no. It's just ideological battle with the assumption that if we battle the bad people and we marginalize them and get them out, everything will get better. And if we don't do that, the bad people are going to take charge and everything will get worse. And so this is another thing that I think sometimes we don't, when we get into this mode, we don't realize what we are no longer able to talk about by entering that mode.
Oh, totally. Yes. A lot of subjects are taboo. You can't even bring it up. You can't even bring something up with folks before they're labeling you as evil and a member of the opposing side, and then they'll assume that you have views on an array of other issues that they know nothing about your perspectives on. And it's just ridiculous, completely unproductive, and I would put forth very, very destructive on a lot of levels. And I think you would probably agree the way in which we're interacting with each other is just silly.
Very much so. And it's also, look, we all know that there is a group of people with a lot of power in this country. Billionaires, corporations, large donors, large, powerful institutions, media institutions, powerful foundations and nonprofits and so forth.
Yes.
Intelligence agencies, branches of government, all of them are constantly trying to shape a narrative in their favor in order to increase their power and their resources, because that's what they do, right? So if you give them a tool by which you can make something undiscussable, because to even discuss it identifies you as on the bad side, and therefore someone to be ideologically battled, that's a very powerful tool to give those individuals with which to manipulate us and prevent us from having discussions that they do not want us to have.
Exactly. Boy, man, exactly. You hit the nail right on the head. And go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and just to dispel the image that might be coming into some people's minds, none of that requires a group of people smoking cigars in a back room, like plotting, right? That happens, I think, sometimes. But this is the normal behavior of systems that have certain incentive structures. And the incentive structure is to build narratives that because we do live in a democracy, which means that you can't just pound people over the head when they say the wrong thing with a stick, right? You have to figure out some way to prevent them from even thinking the wrong thing that you don't want them to think.
Totally.
And that structure of good side, bad side, hey, have at it. That's a very powerful tool for those who want to control those narratives.
Yes, and you mentioned incentive structures, and that's what I wanted to just comment on quickly. There's a lot of incentives for the powers that be to keep this paradigm alive and thriving, because it does exactly what you were articulating. It gets people to not have these conversations that they don't want people to have. And also there's a lot of incentive structure to gin up the controversy in the media landscape. I mean, that's how a lot of money is made. I mean, these captivating thumbnails or headlines on YouTube, for instance, and a lot of news is being consumed over social media and YouTube. That's what gets clicks and eyeballs, and we're in an attention-driven surveillance economy. And so the incentive structures are antithetical to fostering substantive understanding of issues. And that's why podcasts are one of the structures that actually works against that stream that's becoming like a river and becoming extremely powerful in our society, because it allows for a more nuanced and thoughtful conversation.
Totally agree. And I think that sort of also brings up there's a kind of a tension that happens. Like, let's say you are, the DNC or you are the RNC, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's this automatic tension that happens, that you have kind of two constituents that you have to be dealing with. And both are important, but one is kind of more important than the other. So there's the funders, the people who are actually paying for all this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the critical part, because you can't keep the lights on, you can't keep the doors open, you can't pay the staff, you can't personally get paid. You got kids going to college, you got a mortgage to pay, you got, that money has to keep flowing, right? So the donor class has to be appeased, right? At the same time, you also have a base, a voter base, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they want populist ideas, right? What does our voter base in general, what do people want collectively? Most people who identify, left, right, whatever, most people are in favor of, for example, having some kind of single payer health system in this country, right? Mm-hmm. Most people are in favor of raising the minimum wage, right? There's lots of things like this that people want. But the donor class has really different goals, and it's not necessarily in the interest of the donor class. So then you get this thing where the party is having to promise things that may be completely antithetical to what the donor class actually wants, right?
That's right.
So how do you resolve that problem, right? How do you please both of those? If you can convince the populist base, not like, hey, we're going to deliver X, Y, and Z, but that other side is going to destroy everything you care about, right? That other side is pure evil. And your only job is to support us to get them out, right? These godless communists are going to destroy everything, right? These these racist fascists are going to destroy everything, which is not to say that there aren't godless communists and racist fascists, in reality on these sides in some cases, right? But the point is, when you can make your main political rationale preventing the other side that's super bad and evil from taking over, you no longer have to justify what you are actually going to do for your voter base. You just have to prevent those guys from getting in.
Exactly. I mean, like what you just said. And I saw some research, I wish I had access to it right now, with regard to the policy positions Americans had across the board on a variety of really important issues, such as healthcare, and single payer specifically, I believe, was on there. And a majority of Americans, upwards of 60, maybe even 70%, thought that was a good idea. But yet, with all of these important issues, the American people that were polled, and hopefully they were done, the polls were taken is with some decent accuracy. I know that's not easy to do sometimes, but some of these polling companies actually do understand how to take a variety of opinions into account. But oftentimes these policy positions that most Americans want and are for, the United States Congress didn't enact. But the policy positions of the donor class were enacted. So what I'm saying is we really don't have that strong of a representative government as we think. Congress doesn't vote in line with what the people want. They vote in line with what the donors want. And what the donors want and what the donors do is they generally control Congress, and they shift their opinions on issues according to what they want, not according to what the people want. So the idea of representative democracy tends to go by the wayside. When I saw that, it didn't surprise me, because I'd heard about a majority of people wanting certain things, like you were saying, single-payer health care, and how that might be a really great way to go about administering real health care for people. Because I don't think I'm alone in this, is that our healthcare system is rather upside down and absurd in so many ways. That's like a whole nother podcast, actually. But anyway,
it will be a whole other podcast. We'll do a few episodes on the evolution of our healthcare system historically.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And it's just so great to look at this, and then you realize, oh, that's why these policy initiatives are being put forth the way they are, because when you peel back the onion, as we were mentioning before, you start to realize not just the incentive structures, but also the power structures in this country.
100%. And one of the ways that really gets revealed, exactly what you're talking about, is when there's some issue that the dominant party supposedly wants, that they supposedly ran on, like whatever party is in power. I'm trying to think. Probably shouldn't even pick a specific example, because it doesn't really matter what the issue is. But let's say that one of the parties has control of Congress, right? And so in theory, they should be able to get through whatever their sort of most favored populist policy plank is. And yet, inexplicably, what happens time and time again is that there's like 3 or 4 defectors from that party who inexplicably vote against their own party. And then everybody gets very, very mad at them. How dare they, abandon they ruined what, we could have had this thing, except for these 3 traitors who betrayed the party by not voting that way, right? And you kind of think like, oh, okay, well, those 3 traitors, they're going to get primaried, and like, they're going to get kicked out of the party. That doesn't happen at all, right? And in fact, usually, almost without exception, the defectors, the so-called traitors, are people who are not going to be in danger of being voted out. They're either running unopposed, or they have their district locked up in whatever way, and the party not only doesn't sort of financially try and primary them or give money to someone else that would negatively affect them, it seems that those people almost get rewarded. And a lot of people are like, scratching their head, what's going on here? Why is the party behaving this way? It makes perfect sense if you think of it from the standpoint of the party has a problem, and the problem is that the populist legislation that they ran on cannot actually be delivered without offending the donor class. Exactly. And so if they are in power, they need to have some way of preventing that legislation from coming through, right? If they really wanted it to go through, they could. So
yeah, exactly.
It's one of many things that made so much more sense once I kind of understood, like, okay, this is not really like a war between two sides, you know.
Yeah,
But,
and it's you know, like you were saying, if we could just get rid of those people or what have you, when you start looking at it from a broader perspective, you just understand what's actually going on to a much larger degree. And you know, yeah, you should be following the money. That's always part of the conversation. It's not always the thing to just focus on. There's a variety of other variables, but if you ignore that, there's no way you can really understand what's happening. It's like trying to study political science or international relations without studying economics on the world stage. There's no way you can understand politics because they're deeply intertwined. So
yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, I would say follow the power. And power and money are very, very deeply connected. Occasionally, they might not be exactly in line, but in general, money is going to give you more power.
Yeah.
So it's, and I think power in the end is what is desired, right?
Yes. And, I also saw some statistics about the likelihood that a political candidate in most races across the country will win. Well, it's usually the person with more money. And that's just so sad. That's so
98%. I believe. I think something like 98% of races are won by the person that has more money.
Sure, but it wouldn't surprise me, and it's very sad because, it comes down to media and influence. And, one of the things that we're going to talk about on this show, which is the power of PR or propaganda for, if you want to term it in another way. And it's super powerful. Messaging is incredibly powerful.
It really is. Starting with the name public relations. Public relations is itself a public relations term, right? Because
nice.
We're gonna look back on this, but in the sort of birth of the modern PR public relations movement, that was a time period at which that behavior, that endeavor, was still called propaganda, but it had such a negative connotation after World War I and the Committee for Public Information, which we'll also talk about quite a bit on the show. The first act was to come up with a new name that didn't have the negative connotation, which was public relations, right?
I like that. It sounds so innocuous and friendly. Yeah. We're just relating to the public.
I think this might be a good time to talk about some of the things that people are going to hear on future episodes, what we're going to be talking about.
Great.
The first episode that you're going to hear, well, the second episode, the first episode after this one, episode 2, is going to be the interview that you've referred to quite a bit already, which is the interview with Dr. Verlin Lewis. He and his brother wrote the book, The Myth of Left and Right, which is very strongly recommended reading for anybody who is interested in fleshing out this context. They do an amazing job of laying out the history of what was called the left and the right in the United States, a remarkably recent history. A lot of people sort of assume that there was a revolution and then some founding fathers, and then next thing you knew, there was the left and right, and they just are battling each other, and here we are. But it's really quite a modern invention that only came into sort of widely used parlance in the 30s, really, with the WPA and the New Deal. And prior to that, really, the terms were used, but very infrequently and without most of the connotations that they currently have. So we have not historically been a country framed within the left-right spectrum throughout our history. It's a modern invention, very much a product, again, of the public relations industry, the technologies of radio and television and mass print media, without which I don't think the left and right could actually exist without these technological changes in how we communicate with each other and how we form narratives, how we tell stories to each other as people. And they do an amazing job of breaking down why that spectrum is really mythological if you start to tease it apart, to the point that we shouldn't even really go into it that much in this episode. We've already given a lot of the flavor of it. But our next episode is really going to be making the case via that interview with them and their book for why we are starting with the assumption that the left-right spectrum is in fact mythological.
Yeah, and it's incredible, and the moment that the thing that actually allowed me to learn about this book was you were telling me about an interview with the brothers Hiram and Verlin Lewis on Conversations with Coleman, and I remember listening to that interview and just blown away on so many levels. So grateful that you shared that with me. And it really just struck so many chords for me. And it propelled us forward in the inspiration to make this show, for sure.
Absolutely. I don't think that we could be making this show, at least not with the framework that is as clearly delineated as I hope it will be, without their work. We really owe a great deal, a great debt to them, and
for sure
can't recommend their book enough to anyone. It's relatively short and relatively easy. They are academics. They're both professors of political science and history, and as academic books go, very readable. Very common language, but very rich, very dense, very well sourced, very well footnoted.
Yes. Lots of really good research and scholarship done. And that's what's really beautiful about it. And they kind of, you can tell when they were talking about it, how it was very revelatory for them. They're going through the same type of process we are. And they wrote this book that really, was really instrumental in us having the idea for this show.
Absolutely, and we'll put the link to they have a web page and to their book. We'll put that link in the show notes, and a little more information about them. But so that's going to be the first episode, is really just kind of setting that case, so that hopefully then we can move on with hey, we've really kind of established. We've made the case for the fact that the left-right spectrum is mythological. Now what? Right? So now into episode 3, right? And this is where I guess I would say that we are going to embark on a historical journey. Right? We're going to go back in time, and with this reframing, or unframing, I suppose is a better word than reframing, with this unframing of our political history, we're going to re-examine the evolution of our political and cultural institutions, freed of that framework. And our first destination in the time machine, which is obviously somewhat arbitrary because history does not have a starting point, but we have to start somewhere. And
right.
In our kind of deep dives down a bunch of different rabbit holes, the consensus was we want to go back to post-bellum, post-Civil War, Industrial Revolution, the 1860s, 70s, 80s, that time period, where America really is undergoing a profound technological and cultural revolution. An industrial revolution, obviously, that started many years earlier, but we have the development of trains, steel, coal, the banking system, and what am I? And oil, right? So
don't forget oil.
Oh, don't forget oil, for goodness sakes. The partnership of all of those, and the way that they kind of reworked how we interact with each other. We went from an agrarian society to an industrial society. People relocated en masse to urban areas. There was mass immigration in the South, mass migration of the freed slaves north. Gradually over time, of course.
Sure.
And this is where we really start to see some powerful changes in the narratives that Americans are told about themselves and their own political system and what constitutes good citizenship. And there is one particular document that I found to be extremely telling as a kind of an origin story of this new reimagined America. And that is a text called The Gospel of Wealth by Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie was, right? Very, very appropriate because it really is a gospel. It is a religiously inspired text that gives the moral justification for modern capitalistic greed as an inherent moral good. Right? And a justification for the growing inequality that you see during this time period, right? The Gilded Age, of course, a time when a small number of individuals were getting fabulously wealthy, and a huge number of other individuals were living in absolute squalor, right? In horrendous working conditions, child labor, no unions, indentured servitude, the Jim Crow, all of these kind of usury systems developing. And the Gospel of Wealth is really fascinating, especially because if you go search the Gospel of Wealth, you will find dozens and dozens of laudatory champions expressing how this text is still a wonderful representation of how we should behave economically to this day. But if you unpack it, it's sort of a recipe for a very small group of very, very wealthy men and white men, of course. Usually, doesn't necessarily have to be, but certainly was historically. And and the corporations that they developed, U.S. Steel and the Rockefeller Foundation and nonprofits and this sort of confluence of all those institutions coming together to reshape the structure of society. And I think it's a great point to start on our journey.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And the the next topic that we're going to talk about, which is the Committee for Public Information, it allowed them to justify this to the public. I mean, it's just like, hey, let's roll out the advertising. Let's get in line with what we're doing.
Talking about the Committee for Public Information and looking at this, I'm still wondering if we want to do an episode. This is a living document, folks. So don't hold us 100% to this. There is kind of a gap filler in there that I think needs to be addressed, which is the birth of the modern corporation as a virtual person with the legal protections of an actual citizen. Particularly the 14th Amendment. That happened in 1886 with the Supreme Court decision that gave corporations those rights. And
it's very important. It's very important for people to recognize the date that you just said, the year 1886, right? We're not talking about Citizens United.
No,
Okay.
no, this is
happened
long ago.
way before that. And most people don't have any idea the power of that decision many years ago. So
Yeah.
Looking at this from a historical perspective is absolutely critical to us understanding what the hell is going on today.
Yeah, and that decision, I think one of the things that was fascinating about it was, the 14th Amendment, which established due process for all citizens, was really written in order to give rights to freed slaves. Right? Mm-hmm. That was really its supposed rationale. After that decision, within a few years, the vast majority, something like out of 240 cases, something like 230 or something like that, the vast majority of appeals based on the 14th Amendment were by corporations, not by freed slaves. Right? So they were the ones who quickly took advantage of that. And really from that point on, corporations have been more and more legally codified as legal people, right? People, virtual people that have the same rights as actual people, but not the accountability and liability of actual people.
And that's the distinction that's so important for people to realize. You have the rights of a person, but you don't have the accountability, because when the corporations do something really egregious or nefarious, oftentimes nobody's going to jail. Where you think, oh my God, that's criminal activity, crimes against the environment and contaminating drinking water, or whatever the case may be, or the Purdue Pharma, I think the company that was pushing OxyContin on a lot of different communities across the country and paying doctors to do so. I don't see any of them in jail. What's up with that? They're just legalized drug pushers, but yet somehow they're shielded from this liability through the corporate structure. So we're going to address that.
And it's really necessary because the individuals that we were talking about, the so-called robber barons or captains of industry, depending on who you're asking, there's still this sort of debate. Were they great? Were they terrible? One thing that's certainly not in doubt is that they were incredibly unpopular, to the point of armed revolt, to the point where they were having to hire their own private armies to compel via violence their workforce to continue working for them.
Yeah,
so they were deeply unpopular. And this was really one of the key elements of the gospel of wealth. Is it's these individuals saying, essentially Carnegie was saying, hey, we actually have to perform philanthropy. We have to use our money to make society better, because otherwise people are going to hate us, which certainly they did. And that kind of brings us up to the Committee for Public Information, because at this point we have these charitable foundations, these philanthropic foundations like the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Mellon Foundation, every late 19th century billionaire in modern dollars essentially created their own foundation. And those foundations then had sweeping, powerful effects on the shape of society and the shape of politics. And we see some of that, and the narratives that the stories that we tell ourselves about how our political system works. And maybe nothing is more exemplary of that than the Committee for Public Information. So, and just what that was, for those who are not familiar, Woodrow Wilson was elected, I want to say that was 1913, might have to double check me on that, but he was elected running on a policy of keeping us out of World War I. World War I was deeply unpopular. And once he was elected, there's debate about whether he changed his mind or about whether he never actually meant the promises that he made in the first place, but we do know that almost as soon as he was elected, he shifted his position. He decided that the war was inevitable, that we had to get involved, that we could not afford to be isolationist. We had to join the world stage. And there was then this problem of how do we convince the vast majority of Americans who do not want to be in this war that in fact we should be in this war. And they created the first public, private, governmentally run massive propaganda movement in American history, directed from the federal government top down, involving tens of thousands of people, including thousands and thousands of average citizens who were hired or convinced as volunteers to be influencers, who were given scripts written by the committee to deliver as if they were organic expressions of those individuals. They were the so-called 4-minute men, because they would give these 4-minute speeches in intermissions during movies all around the country, passionately advocating for involvement in the war. And it was incredibly successful. And within 1 year, the public had completely shifted its opinion and was in favor of battling the evil Huns, as they were called.
Totally.
So it sort of set the precedent that it was possible through a coordinated effort in cooperation between the government, the media, very prominent journalists were involved, like George Creel, propagandists, PR people like Edward Bernays, and lots of politicians, lots of prominent business people, all coming together to say, like, hey, we need the American people to believe this. And so we are going to manufacture that consent, to use the term of Edward Bernays.
And also the book, I was in a book entitled with the same phrase by Noam Chomsky, Manufacturing of Consent.
Yeah. Who did it?
And that's really what's that?
Oh, just that Chomsky, of course, gives a great analysis of all of this.
And that's essentially what we're talking about. We're talking about the manufacturing of consent, but it's called public information or public relations. To put a nice spin on it. And I love the idea or the term spin. Oh, we're going to put our spin on this topic. Oftentimes, spin is just a euphemism for, no, we're going to lie about it, but we're going to put it in a way that seems palatable and believable. It's like unbelievable, the system that we live in. But yeah, the Committee for Public Information is absolutely critical, and figures like Edward Bernays, who's the nephew of Sigmund Freud, who was intimately familiar on how to manipulate the subconscious mind. And so, a lot of this does happen in the subconscious, which a lot of people don't realize. And a lot of our visceral reactions, us included, and we've learned how to tamp those down over time just by having these conversations and making these distinctions. I mean, I probably speak for both of us that we're a lot less triggered, which is very wonderful. And I can listen and discern with a lot more peace around controversial issues now. It's very the manipulation of the subconscious mind happens in a very insidious way. People don't realize this is happening, and there's a whole industry that does this, and they're experts at it. They're extremely effective and well trained. And Edward Bernays was one of the people who really set this in motion. That we'll talk about, even the precursor to him. This guy named Ivy Lee, and his nickname was Leadbelly, which is weird. Ivy Leadbelly Lee, like Leadbelly, the blues artist, I believe is. But they're two different people. But yeah, these people are very, very influential in this whole industry taking shape in this country. And, fast forward to today, it has a profound effect on our society right now.
For sure. And Edward Bernays is going to get, he deserves his own episode, I would say. So he would be next in line. Edward Bernays was involved in the Committee for Public Information, not at a super high level. He was a very young man. But he was successful in his, as you mentioned, Edward Bernays was Freud's nephew. He grew up as a child in Vienna. He was his double nephew, which is kind of a crazy thing. How
does that work?
Freud's sister was married to his wife's brother.
Okay.
So he was a double nephew, if that makes sense.
Wow.
He was a nephew of both sides of the family. And he grew up listening to these discussions. All of these people were heavily involved in the psychoanalytic community in Vienna in the late 1800s, during this same time period that corporations are beginning to form and propaganda is beginning to be sort of a science. And Edward Bernays essentially used the theory of the unconscious, Freud's theories of the unconscious, that people were driven not by rational understanding of information, but by deep, raw, powerful emotions. And that therefore the way to affect their opinions, the way to affect their behavior was not by convincing them with good information, but by appealing to emotional hot buttons. And
totally,
which of course we understand now that advertising is entirely based on manipulating our emotions.
Totally.
If you drive this car, you're going to be successful and have high status and date the person you're going to date, and you're going to be amazing. And these tropes of belonging and attraction and status and all these things that we care a lot about. And he was the one who, if the introduction of the show, you hear Edward Bernays as the first quote. He says that after he came back from his foreign posting, he was actually overseas trying to influence the publications in other countries in order to increase popularity of our involvement in World War I. His famous quote was, "I found that ideas were more powerful than bullets. And if propaganda could be used for war, it could be also used for peace." And of course, what he means by peace is we can manipulate people's opinions at the behest of wealthy clients. That's what he actually means.
Yeah.
So Edward Bernays has some fascinating clients and jobs that he performs for people. One of my one of the most fascinating to me is his work in getting more women to smoke. This is in the early 20s. Very few women were smoking tobacco. It was almost exclusively men. And the American Tobacco Company hired Edward Bernays to try and get more women to smoke. And he was very successful at it. He was a very liberal man by today's definition of that. He was very heavily involved in the suffragette movement and advocated for the women to get the vote. And he designed an event in which a number of suffragettes who were parading in New York for some action in favor of the women getting the vote would light up cigarettes all at the same time. And he hired photographers to capture this and get images in all the newspapers in the country. And he called them, the cigarettes, torches of freedom.
So that's a really good idea.
Right? Brilliant. The guy's brilliant. And so he instantly transformed the cigarette into an image of female power, of women being able to do everything a man could do. And within a year of that campaign, the number of women smoking increased by something like 300%.
Wow, dramatic.
Really dramatic. And there's dozens of those examples. Eat a good breakfast. Edward Bernays was responsible for that campaign. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day, which he performed on behest of a meat packing company that made bacon and sausage.
Totally.
And there's a bunch, and we'll go into all of that. But so that's our next episode. The last episode that I think we're going to highlight here today is the individual that you referred to a little while ago, Ivy Ledbetter Lee, and the Rockefeller Foundation. Ivy Lee.
Oh, yeah.
Another sort of father of the PR industry, who famously partnered with John D. Rockefeller, who again had this real problem with his reputation. He was very deeply unpopular, widely hated, widely mocked and reviled in the press. And he convinced him to form a charitable foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, publicize these good works. And the Rockefeller Foundation principally began to shape our modern medical system via something called the Flexner Report, which radically changed our system of medical education for the better in some ways, I would argue, and for the worse in many others. And we can really see some of the debates and issues we are having today with our healthcare system traceable directly to that action, that movement by Ivy Lee and the Rockefeller Foundation in the early teens and 20s of the 20th century.
Yep, for sure.
So I think that gives people kind of an idea for what they're going to be listening to, and we're going to kind of continue that historical march through the New Deal and FDR and World War II and the post-World War II political environment, where we really see the left and the right start to develop. It really takes off after World War II, right? It becomes completely the dominant mode of our discussion about politics in the late 40s. And essentially at that point, we've kind of arrived, and the rest of it almost seems like kind of window dressing what kind of technological changes we've made in the ways that we communicate, the power of the internet, social media, all of that. Very, very influential, obviously. So I think that gives people a pretty good idea of the kinds of things that they're going to be hearing. So
absolutely.
So here we are. This is the beginning of this journey, and I want to make it clear that we don't know exactly what we're going to find as we continue the story. We've done enough of a dive to know that these are pivotal moments that we want to look at. But we are going to be interviewing academics and other individuals who have studied these topics. We're not just going to be ruminating on our own, but we're going to try and reach out, find people who have really spent the time to provide an academic underpinning for some of these historical movements. We'll be talking to each other continuously as we continue down this path. And I hope people join us and can put up with our long-winded musings.
Yeah, this is definitely a journey, and we're pretty naked in our approach. We're going through this right alongside our audience in as transparent and honest way as possible, so that other people can experience this and take some comfort that perhaps they're not alone if they're starting to experience some of these things. So we're very excited to move forward.
Very much. And I'm excited to make this a two-way street too. I know we're going to get things wrong, right? We're going to get things wrong for sure, right? So I'm really counting on informed listeners who can say like, hey, this part of it maybe you kind of missed, and that's going to be part of our learning process, because we have a lot to learn, right? We have a lot to understand, a lot to unpack here, and it's you're not going to arrive at an answer. You're going to, for every question that we answer, there's going to be 10 more. So I'm really excited. 10 more questions. It's incredible thinking back to when we were just having these conversations as I was driving across country. And, I think the first time that we talked, it was something like a 4-hour conversation. It just like, we were just like, oh my God, someone else who is having this same pathway. So
very revelatory.
Very revelatory. Yeah, I'm so grateful for being able to have these conversations with you, and
likewise
for your expertise in getting this podcast together and helping getting produced, and I think it's going to be very fruitful.
Yeah, and the aim is to provide something that is beneficial to not just our listeners, but society at large, and to be a contribution. And I think that's a really beautiful thing to do, to be of service. And this is our attempt to do that. So we'll see how it unfolds.
I hope so. I hope that we can help each other have a little more compassion for each other, tamp down the hatred of people we don't even know. Empower people to sort of validate their own beliefs without needing to get messages from the outside. To free us a little bit from the high temperature emotionality of our discourse, and get a little bit back into compassion for each other, empathy for each other, and rationality of ideas, as opposed to villains and heroes.
Yeah, I mean, this came up in the most recent election cycle when I was talking to a friend of mine, and they were saying, "Oh, so and so is your guy." I said, "Nobody's my guy or gal or whatever. I'm not married to a person. I'm married to ideas, and I'm married to what I feel is good for society versus bad. And if that person's in line with that, great." And, human beings are frail, and everybody has their shortcomings, and we prop these politicians up like they can do no wrong. Of course they're going to do wrong at some point. They're human beings. Do you know anybody who's perfect? I don't. But the thing is, there's the key is to not look at these politicians as these godlike figures at all, and put that aside. The key is to just look at issues. And so this is in our attempt to foster that type of thinking, as opposed to looking at people and putting all of our belief in them, in some sort of an idolization process, which is ridiculous and just unsustainable standard that doesn't serve us.
Yeah. No heroes, no villains, no simple binaries of good and evil. Right?
Yes.
We all know that those are silly distortions of reality. Right?
Yes, and antithetical to us understanding what the hell's going on.
Yeah. And please do join us for episode 2 with Verlin Lewis and the myth of left and right.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you've been listening to this and feeling a little disoriented, well, that is to be expected. Because what we're really doing here is taking off a set of lenses that most of us have been wearing our entire lives. Lenses that tell us the world is divided into two sides, left and right, good and bad, us and them. And what we're asking is a much more uncomfortable question. What if that framework itself isn't real? Or at least not real in the way we've been taught to believe. The first episode is just the beginning of that process. As you heard, we're not claiming to have all the answers. We're working through this in real time, questioning, testing, and sometimes even struggling with what it means to step outside of that system. But it's not easy. There's a real cost to letting go of a framework that once gave you clarity, identity, and even belonging. But there's also something on the other side of that, a deeper understanding, a little more humility, and maybe a little bit more compassion for people we've been taught to see as the quote-unquote other. And if there's one idea to carry forward from this episode, it's this. You don't have to outsource your thinking. You don't have to accept a prepackaged set of beliefs just to belong. You can hold your values and still question the system that tries to organize them for you. In our next episode, we take this conversation a step further. We sit down with political scientist Dr. Verlin Lewis, co-author of The Myth of Left and Right, a book that helped spark much of what we've been exploring here and is the catalyst for the creation of this podcast. And at the core of his argument is something deceptively simple. There's more than one issue in politics, which raises a powerful question. If that's true, why are we using a single spectrum to understand everything? We dive into why the left-right spectrum doesn't actually hold up under scrutiny, how political tribes shape what we believe often more than logic or principle, and why breaking free from that framework doesn't weaken your values, it actually clarifies them. This is not about abandoning your beliefs, quite the contrary. It's about understanding them more clearly, without the distortion of a system that may be shaping more than we realize. This is Ambiology, and if you're willing to question the story, we'll keep following it together. And if this conversation resonated with you, if it made you pause, question something, or see things just a little differently, please take a moment to follow or subscribe to the show. It really helps us grow and continue having these kind of conversations. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, someone who's been thinking about these same questions, share this episode with them. Because ultimately, this isn't just something to listen to, it's something to talk about. You can also find us on social media, where we will be sharing clips, ideas, and continuing the conversation beyond the podcast. So give us a follow, join in, and let us know what you're thinking. We're building this in real time, and we'd love to have you be a part of it. This show is produced by me, Steve Ordower, and Blake Minnerly. The editor, graphic artist, and social media manager is Carrie Tanner. Thanks for listening. I'm Steve Ordower.
This has been a Rhythm and Light production.